Hello, I'm Elder Rick, bringing you promises from Christ and biblical truths for today's world. Today I'm reading from Matthew 11, chapter 11, verse 28. Then Jesus said, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest." Now, some theology scholars refer to this verse as a great invitation. And that is because the verse is an invitation to all who are burdened with toil and troubles, which would mean basically all of humankind. For are we all not burdened with some type of worry, work-related issues, money issues, family issues, and spiritual issues? In this verse, Christ is reaching out to us not only to lift our burdens, but also to take them upon himself. At the time Christ spoke these words, the Hebrews were burdened by Pharisaic laws and Roman taxes. The Sadducees and Pharisees, which were ancient Israel's biblical scholars, had written hundreds and hundreds of laws to explain how the Ten Commandments were to be observed. And they also placed a big burden on the Hebrews, because these laws covered everything that you can think of. How they were to live, what they were to eat, how they were to dress, and how to work on a daily basis. Not only that, it told them how they were to observe the weekly Sabbath, as well as the ceremonial Sabbaths. Christ was informing the people that these laws were no longer applicable, and he redirected them to observe only the Ten Commandments. And Christ could do this because he represented a higher authority than the scribes and the Pharisees. After all, it was his Father who with his very hand wrote the Ten Commandments and presented them to Moses. In addition, Christ wanted to help lift the mundane daily worries and burdens from his people's shoulders. In this verse, Christ says that he will give us rest. The following verse, verse 29 of Matthew 11, says that he will lift the yoke from our shoulders and place them on his own. Now, the yoke actually represents during the horse and buggy times, what the animal wore around its neck so that he can pull the buggies and the wagons that the people used for transportation. Christ says he will lift those burdens that chafes and tires and replaces it with rest and peace. He also offers to lift the burdens and fear and hatred and replace it with loving kindness and acceptance. Now notice also in verse 11:28 that Christ says, "Come unto me." That means we must approach him and make our request to him to lift those burdens off our shoulders. This can only be done on bended knee. Christ is holding out his hands to lift the burdens and cares from our shoulders, but we must take the time to take those burdens and cares and place them in his hands. Unfortunately, we can be a bit stubborn, and many will not bother to take those burdens and cares and give them to Christ until they have been knocked down to their knees a few times. Christ is telling us not to wait until that happens, but to approach him now, today. This blessing is promised to all who come before him. Christ will give us that assured rest from which weary our very soul. He will give us rest from the terror and the power of sin. And isn't that what we all want? All around us, we see conflict, horror, and pain in this weary world. And Christ is offering us peace, gentleness, and sweetness in his invitation. So, if you have burdens that weary your very soul, place them in Christ's hands. He's waiting for you to call upon him. Be safe and God bless.